For a few dollars more, you know where I can find an archival transfer? Well, seeing as there's such a big reward being offered for an archival presentation for a few dollars more, I thought I just might tag along on your next video robbery. Might just turn you into the video law.
Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video I'll be doing a basic overview and home video history of Sergio Leone's iconic For a Few Dollars More from 1965 and the second film in the iconic Dollars trilogy. Like all Sergio Leone works, For a Few Dollars More has had nothing but problems and issues in terms of its element preservation and its home video presentation, with no release offering a true definitive archival presentation in any way, shape, or form. Some came closer than others, but the film had unique preservation issues and particular things to overcome that actually were different to what the other two films in the trilogy faced. So, like all Leone films, you have to look at each film on a case-by-case basis to study its preservation issues and the variety of things specific to the home video masterings. And just like the other two films in the trilogy, For a Few Dollars More followed a similar releasing pattern, but it wasn't exactly the same. So there are variations and differences even between the video masterings and video releases across different formats, and even within the releases of the trilogy films themselves. So you have to look at each of the three films separately, and you have to look at each of their releases and subsequent masterings separately, in addition to the multiple restoration attempts that were made over the years. And it's a very long, tiresome journey of nothing but problematic releases and preservation attempts to get from the initial releases in the early 80s all the way up to the present new restoration from Arrow Video on their UHD and Blu-ray releases. Now, as usual with these, this is not a complete history of every single release of the film on physical media, nor does it cover each and every single one of the reprintings. But when you look at a film's releases in terms of the major catalog updates, you're able to then see the differences in mastering, new scans that were made, things that were improved, or new issues that were introduced and then became a part of the film's story. And then every time a film was refreshed, particularly one held by MGM UA, that would typically form the basis for all other releases of a film across formats and in foreign territories that would use the same master but make tweaks and changes of their own to suit the foreign market. So if you look at each catalog overhaul from the main studio label, it basically forms the foundation for everything else up until a certain point in the HD realm for this particular film. Like the other two films in the trilogy, For a Few Dollars More was seen relatively early in terms of consumer home video formats and what was available. A Fistful of Dollars was offered as part of early video rental libraries and under Magnetic Video Corporation releases before it transitioned over into more familiar consumer video labels. Now, details about the very early days of physical media releases is sketchy at best. It's really unknown whether For a Few Dollars More was like Fistful in that sense, and so it may have had some very early rental-only releases as part of the home video library sort of run of early titles, but it also got an official studio-associated label release much earlier than the other films. So while A Fistful of Dollars saw its first consumer format debut on the CED format, For a Few Dollars More actually saw its first consumer format release in 1982 with the CBS Fox Laserdisc. This is in the traditional CBS Fox style on Laserdisc with the blue bar on the bottom and a nice portion of the original United Artists one-sheet artwork. This jacket also has a nice glossy sheen and finish on it, which makes it feel a little more premium. The only issue is that the cardstock is very thin, and there are two discs in here, so as you can see, it's got a little bit of ring wear, but it's still in excellent shape for being a disc from 1982. The rear cover has the traditional CBS Fox style, but it looks nicer and the text is more readable because now it's spread across a Laserdisc jacket, and this also has the nice glossy finish on it. Now, this of course is a pan and scan transfer of a direct print element, and the audio, since this is earlier Laserdisc, is only analog. There is no digital track. So this has the original English mono dub sub in mono on the analog, which does have some noise to it, but sounds quite good, especially for the time. Like the later CBS Fox pan and scan Laserdisc release of A Fistful of Dollars that came out in 1985, this is not only similar in design and transfer, but this has a very unique, important element that makes its transfer unbelievably important. This first major home video master of the film is actually uncut. Now, For a Few Dollars More had a number of edits, even edits on its 1967 US release version. So for most of its life on home video and even in theatrical revival screenings, you're almost always seeing a version of the film that is not complete. But going back to this initial pan and scan mastering and finding that it's an uncut version of the film, so it is fully intact, is really surprising. So I don't know exactly what they transferred for this, but it would have had to have at least been some sort of international print, as the 1967 United Artists American prints were censored and had edits and things, so that's not an uncut version of the film, so they couldn't have used a US print to make this. But this is just so striking to go back to and find that for its first major release, the film didn't have any cuts in it. Unfortunately, there's a big problem with this and all video editions using this master. This is terribly time compressed to get a film that's over 2 hours down to more around 2 hours or less. There's no real reason why it's got time compression on the Laserdisc, since it's already on 2 discs, and they could have easily just left it as is and had plenty of runtime left over. So I think this was already being optimized for the other consumer formats, and unfortunately a lot of earlier 80s and even MGM UA titles were given the time compression treatment like this, and that would even wind up on the Laserdisc. So you have to deal with the film having time compression that's greater than PAL speed up on DVD, but you know, you at least know what it is, but when you watch these, you have to deal with the film being significantly sped up. But what's extra important about this first mastering, and I'll talk about it more when I get to the key video VHS release, the audio here is completely untouched and has the greatest fidelity of any version of the English mono until the Arrow UHD. So if you can get this original mastering and capture the audio and try to then undo the time compression, you have an absolutely hands-off, fantastic version of the original English mono mix of the film that will then show you just how horribly it was treated on all subsequent home video masterings over the years, to the point where it got noise reduced to within an inch of its life by MGM in the DVD era. Next, in 1983, came the CED releases on the short-lived infamous RCA format, where you had the plastic caddy that contained a lubricant-coated disc inside and would be then inserted into the player, which had also then be flipped over halfway, and then the player had a stylus inside that read the film off the disc as if you were playing a vinyl record. It's a fascinating system to study, but it was notorious for playback issues and unfortunately was a great money loser and failure for RCA, hence why it was only around for a few years. But MGM had a lot of titles get released on the format as they had an early partnership. So For a Few Dollars More saw 2 different releases of the same transfer, seemingly, as what was on the 1982 LD. These have, of course, the very striking CED-style artwork. In terms of the first pressing by RCA, we have the same figure of Eastwood from the original United Artists 1967 one-sheet in a sort of circle pattern, which was used on most CED artwork, but then the rest of it is filled out with a bunch of gold coins, which looks really striking. So this is one of the really nice collectible CEDs just for the artwork. Then this was phased out in favor of having a CBS Fox branded CED release, which otherwise seems identical to the first pressing. So the artwork was then updated to basically look like the Laserdisc jacket with the blue bar on the bottom, but now on a CED. In 1984, we finally saw the film's release on VHS and Beta formats for consumers. But interestingly, as a number of MGM UA releases did, for some reason they decided to release the film on one of the imprint labels instead of just directly putting out a CBS Fox VHS release, which they would eventually do later. So for a few dollars more was released by Key Video, which again is basically just an imprint of MGM UA. So of course their logo is still here, but otherwise it's got the blue background with sort of rainbow stripes on the side. We do have a replication of most of the original one-sheet artwork, and this was available here in the VHS version or the matching beta version with the same transfer. Both of these releases do feature hi-fi sound, so unlike the early big box 1983 CBS Fox VHS and Beta releases, all of the releases of For a Few Dollars More have hi-fi sound on these Key Video releases. As you can see, the rear is practically the same typeface and layout design as what you would get on a CBS Fox release. It's just a little bit different because it's a Key Video release. So basically, you can picture this being a CBS Fox release instead if you wanted to. But this is the same master as what was on the Laserdisc. So it is a pan and scan direct print transfer of the uncut version of the film with the untouched mono track. But here, because it's hi-fi, it is far superior in quality to Laserdisc analog. So this was the sealed copy I managed to track down and do a high quality capture of the audio track. And this is what I used to finally be able to get a better sounding version of the film. And again, until the Arrow video release and their restoration efforts, this was by far and away the finest sounding version of the film you could get anywhere. In some ways, I still like having this around because it's completely hands-off and raw, so even though it still has some defects and some distortion definitely on the high end, it sounds fantastic, except it's time compressed. So with the invaluable help of Mushroom, who runs the Bad Audio on Blu-ray blog, I was able to get my capture then basically de-time compressed, because they were basically able to figure out the exact rate at which the track had been time compressed and sped up. And so between the both of us, we were able to get my capture sounding absolutely fantastic without the time compression issues. So this is the most hands-off transfer of the film's original English mono, and still sounds fantastic if you can undo the time compression. So as crazy as it is, they managed to do a fantastic job on the audio the first time around in terms of the initial mastering, and the tape hi-fi formats on the Key Video releases are the best iteration of this first mastering. You just have to deal with the terrible time compression. But when I popped this tape in for the first time just to see what the transfer was like, even with the time compression, it was like I was hearing the film for the first time because the fidelity difference was that staggering. And as I'll get into, with each subsequent remastering of the film, the audio got worse and worse and progressively more filtered, and then developed synchronization problems, so there was a bad sync error, and all of this would get compounded time and time again as the audio would get processed again, get more noise reduction, then get remixed into 5.1, and it just kept going and going and going. So this is really one of only 2 releases of the film that actually has the English mono in the quality it should be at and is fully uncut. It's crazy, isn't it? But that is the terrible sort of journey these films have been put on all these decades. This became the standard version of the film you would see everywhere, and presumably, I suppose, what turned up on broadcast television. In 1986, in Japan, Warner Home Video released the film on Laserdisc in their traditional sort of cover style, with a portion of the poster image in the center. This would later get upgraded in 1988 to a green cover with the evergreen designation. Both of these only had analog sound and or pan and scan, so I believe they are just Japanese pressings of the same master, and also would very likely still have the same time compression. Now, if you were wondering about a VHS release that actually was branded under CBS Fox, that was released in 1987, again with the original poster art, but now in the traditional CBS Fox style with the blue bottom on VHS. The rear and overall cover design is pretty similar to the Key Video VHS and Beta. It's just now basically finally been updated to a CBS Fox release. And I think they didn't make very many of these because this is one of the versions of the film that almost never pops up on the used market. But it was in 1987 when they finally changed over from the Key Video branding. We had to wait until the end of the decade for the film to see a new catalog refresh. This was part of MGM UA's overall refreshing of most of their big name titles. This is when they finally started doing brand new widescreen letterbox transfers for Laserdisc, getting new and different print elements together, and trying to make cleaned up spiffier looking and sounding versions than all of the earlier releases that were typically sold under the CBS Fox banner. This was even the time period where we finally saw upgrades to the James Bond films in terms of transfers. So then it was deemed time for them to revisit the Dollars trilogy, which they did one at a time. So in 1989, For a Few Dollars More finally saw a new master first released on VHS and Beta, with the lovely painted image of Clint Eastwood based on one of the original stills from the film. This, of course, was still pan and scanned, but it was a new pan and scan job of a new master, and thus of much higher quality than the initial home video master that dated back to the early 1980s. Both tapes featured hi-fi sound, and in these initial pressings have the silver reflective foil type top to the actual sleeve. These would quickly be transitioned out in favor of just having a standard sleeve without the MGM silver banner on the top, and just have the art across the whole of the cover. And then this is what you find most places, but it is the same tape of this new master. It's just, it was released slightly later in 1990. This same master finally turned up on Laserdisc in its original letterbox form in 1991, featuring the same beautiful artwork, now spread across an entire Laserdisc jacket, just, obviously cropped to fit the dimensions. We've got the deluxe letterbox banner on the top, and this basically is giving you the master that was generated before it was pan and scanned and then bounced down to the tape formats. Now, these masters were the first time you could really get the film without the dreaded time compression issue, so that was great. And this was the film's first ever letterbox master, so it was the first time you got a release of the film that actually protected and preserved the compositions as intended. Since the film runs over 2 hours, it's of course on 2 discs, and we actually got a pretty nice gatefold, and a pretty nice one for MGM at the time, who would always do these sort of photo collage designs, but this one actually has a color image of Eastwood across most of the gatefold. So in terms of MGM jackets at the time, this is one of their nicer gatefolds, as usually they would kind of have the images spread all over, and most of the gatefold would not be devoted to a singular image, and they weren't always in color either. The only issue is that this doesn't have chapter stops. It's got the space for it, but we don't have the typical chapter stops anywhere, and then the rear doesn't have them either. That's because this disc does not have chapter stops. It's one of the MGM discs that just doesn't have them for some reason at this point. Later, they would be added for the version of this transfer in the trilogy box set. The rear is pretty straightforward. It's nicer than most MGM efforts at this time, but as you can see, it's clearly taking everything that was sized for the back of the VHS cover and just spreading it out more across the back of the Laserdisc jacket. In terms of supplements, this does include the original trailer at the end of the feature, which is a nice touch, and that's really all you could expect at this point in terms of MGM releases. This is still long before the days of the special edition concept becoming fully in the industry's mind. And we look at the transfer. This is, of course, finally letterbox. It's finally a new transfer with better picture quality, but it also has the English mono mix in lossless digital PCM, as this has digital audio, with the analog being a backup of the same track. But unfortunately, we have gone from the uncut version of the film with time compression and untouched mono on the original home video mastering to this updated, well-intentioned attempt that gave us a letterbox presentation of the 1967 US edited version. So the film is now cut once again. This is basically exactly what American audiences saw in 1967. So it has some trims made to violence. It removes the mention of Eastwood's character name of Monko. It doesn't have all of the trimmed bits that are missing from most versions, but randomly it does have the full version of Indio's laughter after being broken out of the prison, which was part of the 1967 edit. So those are the ways you're able to tell that this is indeed a direct transfer of the 1967 United Artists edited US release version, which is a nice thing to have just to be able to look at, but that means the film is no longer uncut and neither is the audio. The overall quality of the audio track is quite good, and this, I think, is the best sounding release that is not the original mastering on the key videotape or the Arrow UHD. I think it sounds very good because it's been basically left alone for the most part. It does have some compromises, but once again, we're dealing with the edited version of the film. This is the US release edit, so it is the censored cut version. So that unfortunately does compromise this release, and it's quite ironic that the very first master from the early 80s actually got most everything right, even though it was pan and scan and time compressed. So that's the particular quirks of MGM's first major attempt at restoring the film. So this became the new standard version of the film in print everywhere, and when you saw the reissues on VHS tape, they were just repressing that same 1990 tape pressing with updated copyright information. This also became the version seen on television everywhere and would be reissued a number of times. However, on Laserdisc, it only saw one reissue, which is in the 1993 Clint Eastwood Trilogy collection. This brings together all three Letterboxed Laserdisc editions of the Dollars Trilogy films in one of MGM's nice lift-top box sets. They do include their original trailers, but they are otherwise the identical same transfers. They're just now in a box set together with chapter stops and the unique box artwork. The rear looks nice as it uses, of course, the iconic still from the end of the film. The only thing that will irk us Leone fans is that it's called the Clint Eastwood Trilogy instead of the Dollars Trilogy box set. Then you lift the top off to find all the discs and their sleeves inside, and we get a single page insert with the chapter stops and some images that on the reverse has the little blurbs from the rear cover of the VHS and other standalone Laserdisc editions. Then we have the classic MGM Laserdisc sleeve with the classic yellow label. And this is one of the few MGM Laserdisc box sets where each of the films are separated on their own disc due to where they fall. Typically on the box sets they would make, MGM, to save disc space, would actually have one film run into another, sometimes halfway through a side, which, you know, it's understandable why they would do that, but it is a little bit frustrating sometimes when you just want to get to one film and you have to go to halfway through side 3 and then it stops on, you know, a quarter of the way through side 5 and then suddenly the other film starts. But this is one of the MGM boxes where you actually don't have to worry about that. So this is a nice way to get all three MGM letterbox transfers in one set. However, it is much less common than the standalone versions, which are also far cheaper. So it's actually more difficult, more expensive to get this box set version. So if you have the standalones or you're wondering about which version to get, the transfers are the same, really. The box set just has unique art and the listing with the chapter stops, but otherwise, it's exactly the same as the standalones. It's just that the box set also adds dedicated chapter stops for some of the discs that didn't have them. So that's how the film stood until its next refresh attempt. MGM started working on their bigger catalog titles once again towards the end of the 1990s. It seems the goal was to produce spiffed up Laserdisc editions, sometimes special editions with extras, and even more 5.1 Dolby Digital AC3 up mixes for certain titles. Some of these started coming out on Laserdisc, but it was basically the end days for the format, so MGM very quickly started transitioning their efforts onto DVD. So the Dollars Trilogy didn't see releases again with new masters until the new DVD format. So these masters, seemingly the work started around 1996, 1997, as MGM finally did an updated, nearly complete version of Duck-You-Sucker, which only saw a Laserdisc release because that film is cursed and still remains cursed to this day. For a few dollars more, saw a DVD release in 1998 with the new updated artwork alongside The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and A Fistful of Dollars. Unfortunately, only GBU was given an anamorphic transfer, so both For a Few Dollars More and A Fistful of Dollars on these releases were non-anamorphic widescreen. So when you look at these on a modern 16:9 display, you have the dreaded picture boxing effect of the whole image being surrounded by black letterboxing. These DVDs were also new attempts at making new masters to overcome problems of past releases, but MGM accomplished this, as they had done with some of the past releases, by mixing and matching print elements and just trying to do the best they could with what they had in terms of their holdings in the US, as MGM didn't always have the original negatives or have access to anything that was held by the Italian rights holders. So on For a Few Dollars More, we get a new widescreen transfer that is not the 1967 US release edit. It has most of the trimmed material restored, but it's also missing other things, so it's not uncut. And while it's obviously a visual upgrade over the LD Master, it's now processed anew and has edge enhancement and things. As it's an early DVD, it also can suffer from early DVD issues of compression since it's a longer film, but this still holds up relatively well for being an early DVD in that respect. The problem really comes into play when we look at the film's audio, and this is really important because the decisions, choices, and mistakes made here cursed the film on every single subsequent release until the new Arrow restoration on their UHD. And this is because the original mono track was given an excessive amount of noise reduction, so not only is this a cut version of the film that's its own particular weird cut, so it's longer than the censored cut US version from 1967, but it's still not 100% complete. But the audio is now heavily filtered, heavily processed, making any of the past releases that had some processing on Laserdisc and VHS look like nothing. So now the mono track is quite muffled and dead sounding and overprocessed. But on top of that, in their attempts to make a seemingly uncut version of the film that still wasn't uncut, they were putting back pieces of the film from other elements, and in doing so managed to introduce a really bad audio sync problem. So from this release through every other release, including the Kino Lorber release on Blu-ray and UHD, you run across the mono track having various sync issues. It's at its worst here on this DVD because subsequent masterings were made of this audio that at least improved the sync a little bit here and there, and then Kino tried their own attempt, and thankfully it was made a little bit better over the years, but it was never fully in sync the way it was supposed to be. And this being a film that was shot silent and then post-dubbed anyway, you know, you're supposed to have a little bit of a perceptible off-sync quality just due to how these are made, but having the actual audio be defective and off sync to a significant degree really is a problem because it accentuates how the film was made, and you're not supposed to have that effect. So unfortunately, this caused an audio sync issue that has lasted in various forums all the way up until the new Arrow video restoration. So this is the version of the film I grew up with, and I just thought that was part of the film. I also mistakenly thought this was the complete film, which it was not. So while this was a transfer upgrade over the Laserdisc, yes, and component video now, when you got a 16:9 display and you rewatched this DVD, you realized it was not anamorphically enhanced. And the more you dug into the releases of the film, the more you realized that this 1997, 1998 restoration attempt had a lot of things go wrong, and it unfortunately introduced a lot of new problems. And so this could not be considered a proper restoration of the film. Now, in terms of the artwork, it's a nice looking cover that's obviously reflecting the MGM covers of the 90s, focusing on new compositions of the actors' faces being taken from stills and put on a dramatic background. This is very similar to the iconic 1995 series of James Bond collection VHS artwork that has the matching Bond figures with the hand and gun pose. The spine is solid, and all three trilogy DVDs were designed to go together in terms of their aesthetics. These first pressings, like I have here, have the slightly more spiffy and deluxe rear covers that try to hype up the interactive menu and scene selection, and also that you get the film all on one disc, indicating that these were really designed to make people excited that they didn't have to flip discs like they did on Laserdisc. Eventually, MGM would revise the rear cover on later pressings in order to make the art a little more standardized. So you typically would lose the bar on the side hyping the menus, and you also lose the really cool little booklets. So inside we have the really nice, cool new disc label and the aforementioned cool booklet. You have to give MGM credit because they were really trying to make their DVDs special at the time. The text in these booklets, along with the imagery, is really fantastic. These still hold up today as fantastic booklets and better than what we see in almost all modern studio label releases, which, if they have printed material of any kind, it's usually really crummy. So I still really love these booklets. I just hated that growing up I never could get first pressings of the other two that still had them. And what I always loved was that MGM would actually hype up that this was actually a widescreen presentation and give consumers a visual just trying to convey what you lost in pan and scanning. And this is just something I wish more studios had adopted, so that, it might have been possible to abolish the practice of panning and scanning more quickly than it eventually was. Now, these were sold as standalones, but then there was also a trilogy slip box containing all three individual releases that was sold under the Man with No Name Trilogy moniker. This became the new de facto standard version of the film, and also saw some updated VHS editions, which were then, of course, pan and scan versions. It took quite some time for MGM to revisit their Sergio Leone catalog, and it was really the 2003 extended English language version of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly that spurred the whole process onward. So after that heavily revisionist version with the infamously bad 5.1 sound mix was released, they came to look at the other Dollars films along with Duck-You-Sucker. This work was done seemingly in around 2003 and 2004, with the idea being there would be a deluxe special edition DVD release of all of them in 2005. That happened in the UK and region too, but we didn't get them here in the US until 2007. Seemingly, it was perhaps due to renegotiating rights with the Italian rights holders, who around this point would start attempting and doing their own restoration efforts, producing their own masters separate from what MGM did. So finally, in 2007, in the US, we saw a newly remastered, newly restored version of For a Few Dollars More in a deluxe package with new supplements, making it a true special edition. This turned up with the new artwork to match the 2003 extended GBU in this really nice package. This was also sold alongside the other special editions in a combined Sergio Leone anthology box set that merely brought all of the discs and printed materials together in one box. But I do actually prefer the fancier standalone packaging of each film, which in the first pressing actually has a really nice, reflective, glossy, embossed slipcover, where not only the image is given the full color glossy treatment, but the actual title is embossed in terms of all the letters. So I do think these remain some of the fanciest and most impressive packages for the Dollars trilogy on physical media, but only these first pressings have the full slipcover. And actually, calling this a slipcover is a bit unfair. This is a full slip box. So when you take the slip box off on these first pressings, you've got the same artwork, but they gave them these really nice white cases, so they really stand out, and they're the fancier white keep cases. So again, everything about these just screams quality and putting effort in, which unfortunately does not extend to the transfer and audio of the film, which I'll get to next. Inside, you find the new artwork on the discs themselves, with disc 2 being devoted entirely to supplements. So this was the first time the film had a truly deluxe release. We also get a lovely oversized booklet to match the one done for the 2003 version of GBU, and this one is individual, as the first pressing individual releases had spiffier booklets for each film, where the box set anthology just had one booklet with all the pages combined. So I just love the whole aesthetic of these. I like the almost widescreen aesthetic they went for in terms of the layout, and I've always just loved what MGM did with the packaging of these. So the artwork, the design, every aspect of these, I think, are really lovely to have on the shelf and make them nice little collectible pieces if you're a Leone nerd like myself. This also gave us a whole host of extras, which still form the bulk of the extras found on modern releases. So all the older MGM standard def extras that you see, the interviews, the interview piece with Clint Eastwood himself, all of that was generated and then finally first released here in the US on this 2007 release. Now, the restoration for this film, as documented in the vintage extras, was done by MGM generating a new Technoscope interpositive to then scan and restore. They also performed new restoration work, and I'll explain why I did that in a second, on the original English mono mix, plus they did another brand new 5.1 remix, which tweaked some things and did all kinds of tomfoolery and is to be avoided. But when you look at the actual film transfer and its later big brother in terms of the HD version that was ported over on the Blu-ray release, unfortunately, this is not an uncut version of the film. It basically follows what was on the 1998 DVD, so it's mostly complete, but not quite there. The 5.1 track is, pretty much mostly in sync, but the mono track still is not in perfect synchronization, so there's still sync problems. There's edge enhancement, there's processing of the image, and we're not dealing with the original camera negative, so there's obviously generational loss, there's a particular look to it, and even though this is DVD, when you see the eventual HD version on the Blu-ray, you can then really see how much digital noise reduction was used in terms of the excessive grain management. So this was obviously a big improvement visually at the time over the initial DVD, and it was actually anamorphic and a new transfer from a new interpositive, but this was not a restoration that could be called a real restoration. It was a video improvement, yes, but it still had major problems. The worst of which was that someone decided to take the already hideously overprocessed English mono from the first DVD and give it even more processing, resulting in the horribly, hideously muffled, tinny, dead-sounding version of the English mono mix that then stuck around on all subsequent versions until we got to the new Arrow release. This is basically version 2 of the insane MGM noise reduction on the film's original audio track. This is one of the worst examples of excessive audio manipulation and degradation that I've ever encountered on a classic catalog film. They practically murdered the original audio of For a Few Dollars More with noise reduction to the point that I refer to it as sounding like you're hearing the film over a bad telephone connection or listening to a bad cassette dub somebody made of the audio. It is absolutely ludicrous when you compare it with the original mastering on the key video VHS tape, even before you try to deal with the time compression. It is one of the biggest night and day differences in audio manipulation you can possibly find. Again, I think it's best to describe it as MGM murdering and butchering the original audio fidelity to the point where it is a shadow, a painful shadow of its former self. So the 5.1 remix is totally crap, and the English mono presentation still has sync problems and is still cut, but sounds excruciatingly bad. And then this will pop up on every other version of the film pretty much in terms of the major releases in the Blu-ray era. So we didn't get rid of this for a very long time, and no film's audio should be treated this horrendously. So this, in my opinion, was the worst thing MGM ever did in regards to how they handled this film. It is inexcusably bad. So in terms of North American releases and most releases worldwide, which were done by MGM, that's how the film was now stuck. So it was still not a complete version of the film. There were various picture issues. It was not coming from a negative scan, and the audio problems were now stratospherically bad. So, of course, we then saw an HD upgrade of this in 2011, which basically took the exact same master and gave us an HD version, which made all the visual problems all the more apparent. So the 2011 Blu-ray saw a variety of repressings, but it basically had the same lovely 2007 artwork in a standard keep case. All the extras were ported over, and the only thing newly added was a new HD piece filmed with Sir Christopher Frayling going through his own personal archives. I used to have that first pressing, but I upgraded to the Man with No Name Trilogy collection when the Ritrovata scan of GBU first came out. So this has the nice enough little slip box with some embossing and some glossy printing of the images. The same art is on the case, with the rear having the run times of each film, but inside you've got the same 2010 and 2011 Blu-rays of the first two films with the same crappy 2007 masters and the same crap audio, which means, of course, for a few dollars more is still cut and sounds hideously awful. But GBU in this set has different art because this was the first release of the Ritrovata 4K scan, but this is the first pressing that only has the excruciatingly bad remix audio and, of course, the horrendously bad Ritrovata color grading. Eventually, this would get repressed with a second updated version of the GBU disc as a standalone release that added an attempt to restore the English mono by Chase Audio, which was frankly terrible, so that really didn't even matter at all. But in case you were curious, there were actually two print runs of two different versions of the 2014 GBU disc. Now, when you're looking at the MGM Master of for a few dollars more in HD, the amount of excessive digital noise reduction and grain management is very much apparent. So if you didn't notice it on DVD, you sure as heck notice it on Blu-ray, and it frankly looks like crap. It's still coming from that MGM Interpositive, and it's an older master, and it's still got wear. It's still incomplete. It's still got edge enhancement. So this just magnifies every problem that was already on the 2007 DVD, and the film is not properly restored or complete, and the audio is hideously bad. This unfortunately became what we were stuck with for years due to how MGM controlled the film in most territories. However, in regards to the MGM Master, there was eventually one bright spot associated with it, and this became one of the best versions of the film to get in terms of Leone fans wanting the film on Blu-ray and having it fully uncut with at least some form of English audio, and that became the later 2013-2014 German Blu-ray release, which of course I have here in the region-free double feature set with the German version of A Fistful of Dollars that had the 2007 Italian restoration, which was also one of the easy recommendation options for getting better versions of the film on Blu-ray. So the German release is using the same MGM Master. Here's the disc labels using original poster art. But what the makers of this German release actually went and did was they sourced a lower generation version of the MGM Master before it had as much digital noise reduction applied to it. So it's a much nicer looking image, but it's at the cost of having more dirt and specks and debris visible from the scan itself. So that was the trade-off. At least it was better, but it was still stuck having to use the craptastic MGM Master with all its problems. But the German team actually went and sourced from various places all of the cut footage and properly placed them back in the film, so we had an HD presentation of the MGM Master with less DNR that was fully complete. So that was something MGM themselves couldn't be bothered to do. So my hat always goes off to the people behind this German release for actually doing that. Now, the English mono track on here is relatively serviceable, but it's basically a version of the old 1998 DVD mastering. So unfortunately, it's still one that's been hit with a ton of processing, but thankfully nowhere near as much as the awful 2007 mastering. But when you get to the replaced sections in terms of what was sourced, it's obviously coming from something else, so the quality does dip, but that's understandable. This release is the only one using any form of MGM materials that actually tried to get the film right, and they managed to do stuff that MGM and other people just never bothered to get right. So that made this the easy recommendation for a long time, plus it was region free. It was basically a this is kind of as good as you can do option. Now in Italy, there was a new transfer that was done and released by Mondo Home Entertainment. This first came out in, I believe, 2007 and was only on a BD25 with the Italian mono, so it didn't have a form of the English mono. And then it seemingly went out of print very fast. I didn't find out about it until it was pretty much unavailable. But it was an exclusive transfer that was also apparently fully uncut as well. This was a new scan done, and when you see screen caps of it, it's significantly warmer in its color timing and doesn't show the deficiencies of all the MGM masters coming from their scans of their own materials and their interpositive they made. So I still would like to be able to see this version up close someday, but at least we finally had a new master of the film that had been made in Italy by the Italian rights holders, it seems, and then later it was also apparently repressed once more in 2012, but both versions of this master are rather hard to come by. But it made this Mondo version one that some fans would try to track down, much like the Mondo release of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly became a version to track down to get away from the problems of the MGM version and then the Ritrovata master later on. So that's how the film stood for another good number of years until Ritrovata did a new 4K scan of the film from the original camera negative, and then this was released on home video by Kino Lorber for the 2019 Blu-ray release. This was, of course, a big jump forward in picture quality, but it also being a 4K master meant that it was very likely a UHD might come out relatively soon as well. Now, unlike the other $2 films, Ritrovata did not do the color grading on For a Few Dollars More. In fact, it was apparently Kino Lorber themselves who did the color grading for their release. They merely took the Ritrovata scan that had been slightly cleaned up in terms of restoration work, and then took it before it could be color graded and have a revisionist color presentation applied to it. So that was a good thing, and that means it's the one of the trilogy that didn't have that problem when these 4K masters started out. When the Kino Lorber disc finally came out in 2019, it was of course a visual improvement in a number of areas, but also seemingly followed a lot of what MGM did in terms of its color timing. It had some technical quirks of its own in addition to a not so good encoding job and some macro blocking and other quirks. But even though the original camera negative had been scanned, this still wasn't a fully uncut version of the film. There were still a couple seconds missing, which should not have been missing, so that was a problem. The other problem was that the audio was still the crap MGM 5.1 remix, and then the original mono mix was only included as a lossy codec version, and that was merely the hideously noise-reduced MGM version 2 restored mono, aka the worst one, and it still, of course, had audio sync problems. So this was an example of, you know, a couple steps forward and several steps backward at the same time. And since it was very likely Kino would very quickly turn around and release a UHD version, I decided I was just going to wait it out a bit. Plus, I had been used to watching the film fully uncut, and I didn't feel like going back to it being slightly cut again, and also having to go back to the worst version of the original mono, and it only being a lossy version and still having sync problems. So it was not something I decided to upgrade to. I decided to wait it out, and sure enough, Kino did eventually announce their UHD, which came out a couple years later. Now, the 2019 disc did port over all the MGM Legacy extras, which was good, but unfortunately, those were not encoded very well, and these problems persisted on their reissue of the film on UHD and Blu-ray. And in fact, all of their Leone releases had issues with the encoding and frame rate of the MGM Legacy extras. So in 2022, Kino released their UHD upgrade that saw the film slightly worked on a little bit in terms of bringing it into the UHD realm, but only as an SDR disc, which was just like all of their Dollars Trilogy UHD releases, which are only SDR. The processes themselves were 4K restoration scans, but they did not have any work done in terms of making new HDR presentations. That in and of itself was understandable, and I was very curious to see what the upgrade would be in terms of having a little bit more work put in, now having the original mono be in a lossless presentation, and supposedly the film being fully uncut, as it was advertised as being uncut, and it's even stated on the case of the release itself on the rear that it is fully uncut. So this disc is released, and it is an improvement over the first go-round in terms of the video presentation not having the same level of encoding issues and things, so that was nice to see. Unfortunately, the film is not 100% uncut, as it's missing a couple of seconds this time. So even when they made efforts to make it fully uncut, it's not fully uncut. We once again have the crap MGM 5.1 remix, but also the worst version of the mono, the 2007 MGM track, is now here in a lossless mono presentation. So that really sucks. And in terms of the audio sync problem, they did try to address it somewhat, so it's better, but it's not perfect, and they seem to have taken the track and tried to finesse it with the audio of the restored sections, and I think they tried to sort of chop it into pieces and move it around to try and get it back into proper synchronization, but it doesn't work. It's not fully there. It's better than all the MGM versions, yes, but it's still not a perfect sync, and it's also not a version of the audio anybody should ever listen to, because MGM tried to practically murder the fidelity of the track. So yeah, it was still a gigantic compromise. And the Ritrovata scan itself showed that the negative had a number of issues, and there was plenty of debris and wear and visible hairs and frame vibration and things, which is obviously part of the element. That part makes sense, but the Ritrovata scan itself had quirks and things in it. So it was an improvement over the 2019 release, yes. Visually, it was the best we had ever gotten for the film, yes. But everything else was basically some sort of compromise or problem. And then once again, the MGM Legacy extras were ported over, and those still had frame rate and encoding problems that were never corrected or addressed. So that was another issue. However, on these Kino releases, there were some really wonderful, fantastic new extras generated. We had new pieces from the great Mike Siegel in terms of some really wonderful image montages. We had a new piece with Alex Cox visiting the original locations. And crucially, we had a phenomenal new audio commentary from Tim Lucas. So there were at least fantastic new supplements, and this was a release you had to get, but you also had to keep in mind you were going to have to make your own version to try and address problems as best you could on your own. So here is the Kino UHD Blu-ray combo format second release with the original slipcover using the original Italian poster artwork, and Kino's usual style of being a straightforward release with their general formatting. Here on the back is where you get the little note about there being new work done. This talking about their attempt to work on the color grading, but that this is also they call it the complete edit of the film, which is kind of a misnomer, but this is basically advertising that it's 100% complete now. It's like 99.9% complete. It's missing a couple seconds because I guess people couldn't be bothered to make sure it was actually 100% complete. But at least it was, 99.5% there, because we couldn't even get the full version finally. But otherwise, this is in Kino's usual style, where the slipcover is only on the first pressing, and then you take that off to find the same art and case style underneath. And then inside you find the standard generic Kino labels for both the Blu-ray and UHD. The UHD is pretty much feature and commentary only, and then the Blu-ray is the new master, but with all of the supplements as well. So that became the status of the preservation and presentation of For a Few Dollars More in 2022. So this became a perfect example of, yes, it was admittedly closer in areas, but sure as hell short of a cheroot. The status of Sergio Leone's films still remained cursed, and it seemed practically impossible that we would ever see a release of this film that had a fully complete presentation of the film with brand new restoration work that was carefully and properly done by everybody involved, that brought out the best of all elements, properly presented all legacy extras with new additional fantastic extras of its own, and finally fixed the long-standing horrible audio problems. And then, lo and behold, as if it was Monko himself intervening in the final duel of For a Few Dollars More, Arrow Video announced and has now released their restoration of the film using the same Ritrovata 4K scan for the film's 60th anniversary. And they have finally been the ones to undo all of the issues I have just spent all this time going over. So the presentation on the Arrow video release, even though it's using the same Ritrovata 4K scan in terms of its base, has put in an incredible amount of effort from the people at Arrow and in collaboration with both sets of rights holders and the fan community and Leone historian community in order to try and finally make the best possible release of one of the best Westerns ever made, and one release that could finally be labeled something archival. That's the importance of the Arrow video release. This is such a quantum leap ahead of everything else that has ever existed for this film that, with maybe one or two exceptions, it makes everything else obsolete. This is finally a complete version of the film 100%. This finally has fantastic sounding original English mono without any of the insane levels of audio overprocessing that MGM did, not once, but at least twice. There are no synchronization problems. There are no major color timing problems. There are no major image manipulation problems. There are none of the issues that have plagued every other release of this film dating back to the dawn of physical media. So this, of course, is the limited edition UHD set, which also was done in terms of its HDR in both HDR10 and Dolby Vision. The film was also graded in SDR, so all three formats have it looking as good as humanly possible. Arrow did a ton of work with the Ritrovata scan, trying to improve what they could and massage certain areas and make the transfer as best as they possibly could, also engaging fidelity and motion to do a fantastic job on encoding the feature disc. But just as much work went into overhauling and properly restoring the audio track, and this has also resulted in a brand new 5.1 remix that very tastefully brings the original mono track into a multi-channel environment should you insist on having multi-channel for a 1965 film. They also went to the extra effort of making a secondary mono track with an attempt at an Academy curve roll-off, since the mono has a very strident, loud high end to it that doesn't play nice always with low quality speakers or television speakers. So there's even a secondary audio track for those who don't have higher end audio equipment, who might feel they want to opt for it. The supplements port over all of the MGM legacy extras with proper frame rate and encoding this time, plus a plethora of phenomenal treasures of new extras, making this a fully comprehensive release that even manages to port over the extras generated for the Kino Lorber releases. Now, in terms of the packaging, the limited edition has beautiful new Tony Stella artwork, with matching spine on the slipcase to match the other 3 releases, and then listing the exhaustive supplements on the back. The slipcover removes to have the same beautiful art printed on the case without the rating logos, now with a nice flatter finish, and then a nice sort of wraparound effect with even more fantastic art on the back. The case itself has more brand new, beautiful Tony Stella artwork, this also featuring the Italian title. The spine is custom and matching, as is the rear cover. They've also nicely included the original United Artists one-sheet art for the reversible artwork, which has a matching spine and rear cover. Inside the case, we have the new feature UHD disc with beautiful label artwork. The UHD is, of course, region-free, but the Blu-ray version will be Region B locked, so you'll need region-free capability. The bulk of the fantastic supplements are on the included second Blu-ray disc, which is also Region B locked, so you'll need region-free capability. But this is one of the releases you certainly go region-free for. We have a beautiful new, nearly 60-page book with 4 fantastic essays and original artwork, beautifully done in Arrow's usual style. So this is done to match their lovely book for Fistful, and then concludes with the about the presentation notes, which give you a cliff notes of how much work went into this, but so much work went into this release that really they could have written an entire book just about the restoration work. And then in a really nice touch, the last page has the full MGM artwork originally generated all the way back in the late 1980s. The rear also includes the wonderful original United Artists taglines. Then the fold-out poster has a reproduction of the internal Tony Stella artwork, and on the reverse gives us a nice little reprint of the original United Artists 1967 one-sheet. So that's the limited edition package. Sadly, this has already sold out and is limited to only being sold outside the US, as Arrow does not have the rights to sell the films inside the United States. However, Arrow does have standard editions coming out soon, and I strongly encourage anyone who missed out on the limited edition and anyone who has ever enjoyed or loved these films or calls themselves a Sergio Leone fan, get the standard editions as soon as you possibly can, because the importance of them cannot be stressed enough. The new restoration efforts put in are such that it is the only time there is a release or new restoration where everyone involved tried their darndest to make the presentation as accurate and as good as it possibly could be with the elements they had at their disposal. It is also the only time the original English mono has been transferred from original sound elements and not given some insane levels of audio manipulation. So even if you missed out on the limited set, the standard release has the same all-important discs and extras, just without the lovely extra packaging swag. But I cannot stress how important that release is if you haven't gotten the limited set. And if you've never imported something before, this is a perfect first title to import, because the quality and preservation difference is such that everything else is obsolete, including the Kino Lorber releases. All of the various problems I have discussed in this video talking about the past masterings and releases have all been finally obliterated. This is the release all of us Leone fans always dreamed about but never thought possible. It's now finally here, and what better time than the 60th anniversary of one of the great westerns of all time. So in regards to For a Few Dollars More, it has certainly taken a very long, winding, and torturous video journey to get to this point. We've seen many new masterings, many releases and repackagings, multiple restorations, all disappointments until now. It's frankly insane that it's taken this long and 60 years to get a proper release, but we've finally gotten one, and I had basically given up hope we'd ever see something like this. So if you have not gotten the Arrow release, you certainly have to when they come out with the standard editions shortly. And even though you have to import them and have region-free capability, it is certainly the disc you do that for. Now, admittedly, is the Arrow restoration absolutely perfect? No, there are limitations still with the Ritrovata scan itself and just the status of the actual original film elements. But they have done as good of a job as humanly possible with what materials exist And the only way we could ever see something any better than this is if the powers that be decided to do a brand new 4K scan and restoration from scratch, which would be very expensive and may not result in a whole lot of improvement over this existing 4K scan. So it's unlikely we'll see any new work done in the near future. So what Arrow did here in terms of their efforts are all the more important because it's quite possible this could be the film's last major huzzah on physical media or any type of restoration work. And finally, it has been given the treatment it's always so badly and desperately needed throughout the entirety of its release history and its history on home video releases. So that's a hyper-condensed version of my explorations into the never-ending journey that Sergio Leone's filmography has seen in both its theatrical release history and its history across home video presentations and physical media releases. It is not an easy thing to try and research and understand, and to be quite honest, I've been doing this since I was a kid, and it has taken a long time to be able to even comprehend, let alone remember all this stuff. And so it makes the Arrow releases all the more important because now there's finally one release you can point to and tell somebody who's never seen the film before, just get this one. It's as good as it can be. It's a great release. The film is complete. The audio is properly restored. There's no technical problems like the older releases. It has all the old extras properly encoded and fantastic new extras. I didn't think that would ever happen with a Sergio Leone film. So one can only hope that the other films might see as good of treatment as now the iconic Dollars trilogy has seen. So as always, I hope my babblings about the incredible works of Sergio Leone and their long, crazy journey on physical media has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you have not gotten the Arrow version, please pick up the standard edition when it is announced and released, because it is beyond worth its weight in gold, and it is really the only release you ever need of this film. As always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc in order to help fund incredible restoration projects such as the Arrow work on the Dollars trilogy here, and also to help keep both physical media and film culture itself alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.
After such stellar results with Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More, I just might take you up on that GBU proposition, Arrow.
Oh, doggone it. Why did I think this is such a good idea? I am killing my back.
I've made myself into my own Leone frame without intending to do so.
Arrow Video is back, and they're burning at both ends, if you can take it. Arrow Video is the label with no name. They triggered a whole new style in preserving Sergio Leone's films, and when they came back for a few dollars more, the film in black was waiting. A film preservation mess that was missing footage, has destroyed audio, and was killed by a studio. As if one restoration wasn't enough. As if perfection needed a double. Arrow Video is back, and they're burning at both 4K ends. If you can take it. A fistful of dollars for a few dollars more. Each 4K UHD is better than the other.